Let's try again. Good morning!
Good morning.
All right, super. We're going to put my slides up and we'll do a brief intro at that time. I'm here to talk about supercomputing, and more importantly, how it's really a threat to all of you. It really is. It's a very significant set of problems. Forward. This is me. Here's my disclaimer. My wife, lovely bride, has told me for years, Will, what is interesting to you is boring to everyone else in the whole world. But now that I've become an advocate and an enthusiast for Hadoop, I'm actually the most fascinating man in the world. Big change. I'm currently working on a project. I got funding to work on a project to write a course, a 12-week course on Hadoop supercomputing. So if you really, really want to pin to the wall and get extremely bored, ask me a question about Hadoop, and I'm good for about 4 hours. Okay, here's my argument today. I'm coming to talk to you about not the engineering end of this. I'm coming to talk to you about the talent end of it. And I know you are the right people to talk about it because you are part of the problem. I don't think there's any argument, right? The gap in people to do this work is huge, particularly where I live, which is right dead center in Silicon Valley. And the truth is, we're not doing anything about the gap. It's just getting bigger and bigger, causing us more and more pain. And here's all the kinds of pain. I personally have offered someone a job at what I thought was an exorbitantly high salary, had them accept, and the next morning he called me at 11 o'clock and says, oh, I got a better offer. Yeah, whose house has had that experience, right? Yeah, it's just incredible. And I argue that letting these salaries go up. I've had these guys, I had these kids coming out of college telling me, oh, I'm worth $145,000 a year. I said, well, my pay is only $120, so let's start here, you know. This is outrageous. One of my colleagues just finished working as a senior engineer at Yahoo. His pay, I will share this, was over $300,000 a year. It's outrageous, and it's dangerous. It's wrong. So let's talk about this. First, this number at the top, we finally tracked down. I saw it in a couple of different presentations. People were quoting it. I called in to find it. We finally figured that there was a document released by the Department of Labor talking about various technologies. They claim that 1.5 million Americans need to be hired to do big data in the next 5 years. And if you think about it, at $100,000 a salary, you're talking tens of billions of dollars of salary, tens of billions of dollars of taxes. You are talking a whole bunch of people having family wage jobs. That's what that number represents. And the heat map down there shows you where all the demands are. So it's across all industries, right? Retail, manufacturing, so all segments of the government. I've interacted with the Office of Naval Intelligence. Recently, we started doing a proposal to work for an organization that's trying to collect data out of clinical trials and mesh that into some kind of reality. Research organizations. I interviewed a young man who then took a job in Chile. He's going to work on top of a mountain collecting astronomical data, right? All over. This big data thing is huge. Now look at this line. When I first joined big data, you know, it wasn't even a gleam in anybody's eye. The first conference I went to had less than 500 people in it. Half of them vendors, right? It was one of those. This year, Wikibon, how many people have heard of Wikibon, by the way? Okay, yeah, the big data guys. If you're going to get into big data, you want to join this, wikibon.org. I read this, the first thing I read every morning. Okay? Great. And I trust most of the facts I get out of it. Here's what they claim. 2014, 16 billion global. Look at what they claim is going to happen to us next year. This big data thing, which I'll define in a moment, is going to double and double again. I've actually done this calculation. At $16 billion, how many people do you need to make this work? Yeah, it's a lot, right? And we are not doing anything about it. My colleague, Colleen, she is an HR tech recruiter in Silicon Valley, 15 years of scars, fighting off the ogre, as she says. She did this quick, dirty analysis over just the past year when we've been talking to various people. So, depending upon what you describe as a Hadoop engineer, and the number that we think is really significantly higher is the people dropping out of the search. I have a company I interact with. They're really just because they're down the street right next to the pub I drink at. They have 4 recs open for big data Hadoop engineers, and they've had them open for a year. And their company's in peril. They're invested, they were venture capital funded, and the VCs are just beating the snot out of these guys every day. I mean, he pleads with me, he says, stop what you're doing, come to work. Pleads. This is awful, this is wrong. So, I'm actually going to take the liberty of jumping ahead for just a moment and double back on this. Why are we in this problem? I've now interviewed various universities, 2 in Silicon Valley, 1 up in the Pacific Northwest, 2 on the East Coast. Why aren't you guys producing the Hadoop engineers we need? Why aren't you producing the data analysts? Well, we're trying. Actually, the real answer is this. It's not our job to produce technicians. Our job is to produce computer scientists who are then able to go out and become technicians. That's really what they say to me. Now, I've approached a couple of community colleges locally and said, hey, why don't we partner up? You train in the computer science, give them to me, and I'll be the finishing school. I'll finish them off, and then we'll program them into jobs. And that has actually got traction. I've got 2 schools actually talking to me about putting this program together for next year. You folks are also part of the problem. I got a paper that some guy from major business school will come back to me in a moment. He figured out that in 1992 we spent $20 billion plus training our employees in this country. This past year he estimates it's under $6 billion and going downward. So we're not part of the solution either, all right? There absolutely is no political awareness. I went to DC, I got a meeting with a congresswoman, tried to plead my case, 0, right? I have some military background. I've talked to a number of people in the military, and here's something most people don't know. The truth of the matter is the U.S. military was one of the main providers for your technicians in the mid-level, right? All those ETs, fire control guys, data systems guys, when I was in the Navy, I trained data system technicians. We trained them, and then we turned them over to you after 4 or 5 years with some good schooling, some good experience. They make great workers. 20 years ago, we decided to privatize large sections of the military, including the technology. Guess what? We don't get them from the military either. The only place on the planet I have found, and we all know this, is India, right? Because over 30 years ago, they made a very wise decision, very bold decision, that they were going to take their best and brightest, and they were going to train them to be scientists, engineers, mathematicians, doctors, which is why the Indians now dominate so much of the technology arena and the sciences, right? Their country is willing to make that investment. Come on, one of you guys got the answer, right? I guess not. All right. So here's the solution that we cooked up. Literally, I had a friend of mine. She came to me and says, look, I'm having trouble recruiting people. Could you possibly come and speak to some of these people? And before I know it, I was involved in this whole routine. We were building a schoolhouse. Here's kind of our current strategy. And here's the things that we figured out. 1, you cannot train one of these people in like 4 days. Yeah, I know it's not possible, right? We are building a series of 12-week schools, and it just, for various reasons, it got kind of broken up that way. I have an HR recruiter as really my leader. She tells me what to do, and I answer smartly. Her vision is we want to build a multi-year strategy. So we take them, we provide the classroom training and the real detailed work that they need. We've also been fortunate enough to partner with a company called Skillsoft. How many people have heard of them? Okay, yeah, they're a good company. They've been a good partner. They're taking all our training, they're turning it into video, so we'll be able to offer kind of blended learning, get them in the classroom, turn them loose so that they can do follow-up through video. And then we want to turn them over to people like you. You work them a couple of years, send them back to us. My rough estimate, personal estimate, is it takes 5 years to go from dead scratch to the point where they could actually be a senior or principal engineer. Trust me, there is just no way. I've been at this a long time. I've worked with a lot of kids from Stanford. I've worked with kids who started literally out of the barrios. It just takes time. There's no instant talent. And unfortunately, particularly in the arena I live in high tech, was if you start talking about non-profitability outside of 90 days, everybody shuts up down, right? Nobody's willing to make these long-term commits. But I'm telling you, if we don't do it. Okay, let me jump back. I'm going to change topics slightly. I want to basically kind of address an issue that came up earlier. And this is really me getting on my soapbox about this. I've lived, breathed, fought the wars. You don't know this, but I only have one eye, I only have one hand, one leg. I mean, I've been brutalized by big data. Because let me tell you, the first couple of Hadoop systems I deployed, immature was not the right word. Okay? Prone for failure was the right strategy. Try and tell some credit card company that you just dumped about 400 terabytes of their data and there was no recovery, right? Here's some of the things I've learned and I want to share with you. It's about supercomputing. How many people in this room are experts at supercomputing? Right? And I don't even raise my hand. The number of guys who are really experts in this are probably measured in the hundreds, maybe the thousands. It used to be, long ago back in the 90s, right, or further back, it was a small, little, tiny, very specialized subset that you used it to do weather forecasting. Well, in the last 10 years, all of a sudden the supercomputing thing blew up on us, and now all corporations are in races, all organizations are in races to become supercomputing companies. And if you don't master, and I'm telling you this sincerely, right from my heart, I truly believe this, if you do not master supercomputing, you're not going to survive it. I have a couple of clients that we basically agreed to drop because they're not going to make it. They're not going to make the transition. So, what are some of the transitional aspects that you have to make? Number one on the list, we all build great enterprises. I worked for Oracle and Sun and all kinds of other companies. I built great enterprises. What do I mean by that? Well, we've got a whole bunch of layers. We call it the networking layer. We trained people and they took care of all the networking. Then we went out and found people to be the administrators of the systems, and we built great systems, great databases, great applications. The developers worked in a building that was, 60 miles away. The system and database guys might be all around the planet, right? And we did this through defining very careful service levels and making sure everybody clearly understood. We put in a bunch of great tools that quickly target and says, this is a database problem, solve it here. It worked. Everybody in this room has got a right to be greatly proud of the very complex, sophisticated systems we've built. Primarily driven by the introduction of the internet. Now I'm going to say this comment, you can believe me or not. That enterprise model is going away. It will not work with supercomputing. Will not work at all. Going to have to do away with it. So it's a huge cultural change and a very significant change in how we do business. I'm going to elaborate on this in a moment. Second, those companies that I consider successful supercomputing companies. By the way, Walmart is at the top of my list. Netflix is at the top of my list. Obviously Google and Facebook, right? Experian, I assume, is on my list now. They speak engineering. They practice engineering. They think engineering. From the executive suite right down to the marketing people. You go to Netflix and you walk into the marketing department to do a pitch to them, you are going to get engineering speak. The entire organization is an engineering company. And that's driven by this supercomputing technology, which they have mastered and harnessed. Next, and I've heard this comment twice, the single biggest problem you deal with is correct. It has nothing to do with the technology, it has to do with a subject that we call stranded data. And this is a political minefield. I worked on a project 4 years ago to try and consolidate a bunch of mortgage data for a big bank.
After 6 months, we quit. And we had something running. The biggest problem is, my rice bowl, my data, I'm not willing to share. And consequently, all the value that we preached they were going to get from this data consolidation didn't happen. That is, in my personal opinion, you need an ogre, big club, meat axe, and you got to be brutal. And if you can't break down that problem, I had a great conversation with the guy who runs the Office of Naval Intelligence about this, because you can imagine what it's like in the spook community. He was hysterical. I mean, he had me in stitches on the phone talking about all the problems they have with sharing data, right? This is a huge problem, and it's a cultural shift. And if you can't drive your company through this, you are going to fail. Last, this always causes a bunch of disrupt. And when I'm around, and I go over to Netflix, because I have a couple of friends over there on a regular basis, the way they handle their development and their release cycles would make most of you start ripping out your fingernails, right? Scary. They frequently will roll things, they'll develop something tonight, and they'll put it in production, mass scale, tomorrow morning. Right? So that causes a cultural change, because what happens is you have to understand this statement. And I make all my students memorize this statement. You know, this is my morning mantra with yoga, right? Big data is affordable, and that's really the key answer. It is cheap, mice nuts cheap, supercomputing. Platforms I worked on in the mid-90s that cost tens of millions of dollars can now be built for under $100,000. Right? Hardware is hardly anything, software is all free. It's affordable supercomputing. But nevertheless, it really is. Ever think about this problem? How do you actually take a single job and send it out to 400 nodes to process data at 400 different nodes? You know what? It turns out it's not easy. It also turns out there's lots of ways to fail. A lot of creative ways to actually fail. So you have to you have to master parallel processing. And then the other part of it is massive amounts of distributed data. And I do mean distributed. Currently, they're all lucky that you're distributed inside a single data center, normally on the same floor. But it is coming very, very quickly where this data is going to be distributed across multiple data centers and probably global. I have a friend of mine who works up at Berkeley. He's now talking about the planetary file system, right? Project he's working on. A single file system that would hold all the world's data. That's his pitch. And you know what? It's more than theoretically possible. So how do you handle this problem of massively distributed data? And then obviously for the purpose of gaining value out of data. Now I tell people all the time, it's not about data analytics. It's about recreating the way your business runs. Data analytics is just a tool for it. All right, here's the other thing that's the driver. And this is the piece that I have found when dealing with the more traditional companies. It's hard for them to grasp, and I'm sure in the healthcare this is really the problem. Here's the secret. It's not about technology, it's not about tools. If you want to survive and you want to make this transition, it's about your engineers. You've got to become an engineering company, which means you've got to find great engineers who can fight their way through as a small team. And I've seen that quote by Eric Schmidt before, and I completely agree. You're going to be dependent upon teams. And if you go to organizations like Google, or Netflix, or Facebook, or Walmart, what they do is they organize small teams who have complete control of their entire system, right down to the networking. And when there's problems in that, they have to be able to troubleshoot up and down. It takes a very vertical structure to make this work. Let me end on this slide. Actually, I'll jump to the conclusion too, but here's what we're kind of building. This is our current whiteboard. We're building courseware for all these different pieces. By the way, if I can find a Spark programmer, I'll pay top dollar. I've managed to find people for just about all the rest of this, but they don't exist, right? So we have to manufacture one ourselves. Here's a couple comments though. For those of you who are not real familiar with the term big data, here's the real definition. Big data consists of two large parts. One, is the supercomputing part, which is about massively distributed data. It's about parallel processing. It's about dealing with this ugly subject called NoSQL, which, by the way, at my last count, there's now 75 different NoSQL offerings. Go ahead, you choose. The biggest problem in my experience, again, is the ETL piece, because that's where the political war, right? I see heads nodding, yeah. Great, well, we can share some stories. Then on top of it is indeed the data analytics, is the mathematics of trying to figure out what you have, why it's valuable, what you're going to do with it. And visualization is obviously really, really important. Though I will tell you this, I'm some feet of a master at Tableau, and I find that when I introduce it or talk to people about it, less than 3% of it's actually put to use, right? Are you in agreement? Yeah, I mean, that's a huge gap. So same thing with Pentaho. I like talking to the guys from Pentaho. They're about 3 miles from my house. They're good guys. They're working really hard. But they have the same problem, is they've got this great tool that really has no usage. And then here's the real problem, in my opinion. This is your problem. This stuff will sort its way out. You have to engineering specialized use cases for every single visual instance. Every single individual will have to have its own use case. Your supply chain usage, which I know we'll talk about this afternoon, is going to be different for every organization. The supercomputing platform that Walmart builds is not going to be anywhere near the same that you're going to build for Home Depot. Just not. So I end on this note. It's all about finding engineers who can drive you through this success. Now, I happen to find it kind of thrilling to be standing on the edge of this canyon and looking over into the depths, right? For some of us, it's going to be pretty scary. Let me, so in conclusion, my comments. 1, you really do. You're going to become a supercomputing company. You're going to become engineering oriented. Your whole company is going to do that. Or not. We as a society have to do a lot better job at finding and hiring and training and caring for these superstars that are going to be our engineers. And we need a lot of them. Quite frankly, I'd love to see the day when the price point on these guys as a labor rate goes down, and down a lot, because that means there's now enough in the market space. Really. So that's my pitch. Thank you very much. I'd be here all day and happy to argue any conclusions I've reached that are mislaid.
Thanks, Will. We appreciate that. Next, we're going to have a presentation by Dailey. As I mentioned, we will have a 5-minute technology break to change out the computer, so feel free to grab yourself a cup of coffee, use the restroom, and then get started.